Pliny the Elder said, "There is also a sort of egg famous in the provinces of Gaul, but ignored by the Greeks. Innumerable snakes coil themselves into a ball in the summertime. Thus they make it so that it is held together by a bodily secretion and their saliva. It is called an anguinum. The Druids say that the snakes hiss and cast it upwards, and that it is to be caught in a cloak so that it not touch the ground. One must immediately ride off on a horse with it, for the snakes will continue to pursue until the course of a stream blocks their way. If one tests it, the anguinum will float against the current of a river even when covered in gold. And as the magi will throw a cloak of deception over their trickery, they make out as though the eggs are to be taken only on a particular point in the lunar cycle, as though it was up to human beings to determine the snake's role in this procedure. Nonetheless, I have seen one of these eggs myself. It was round, the size of a small apple. The shell was cartilaginous, and mottled with cups, like the tentacles of a squid. The Druids value it highly. It is praised as ensuring success in litigations and in going to audiences with kings. However, this is nonsense, for once a man, a Roman knight, and a tribesman of the Vocanti, held one of these eggs against his body during a trial, and was condemned to death by the Emperor Claudius for that reason alone, so far as I can tell. Now I relate this tale from Pliny in order to illustrate the important role of snakes in Celtic religious thought mythology. Snakes are featured quite heavily, actually, in Celtic iconography. And of course it goes into the general artistic theme of curvilinear lines. But I think it goes beyond that. Lugus, who's associated with Mercury by the Romans, is almost always featured with snakes, but so is a figure like Cernunnos. Of course, there's the famous Gunderstrup cauldron in which he's holding a snake, but there's other imagery of him holding snakes as well. Normally he has a torque and a serpent. Now, some people could interpret that as being, in one hand he holds chaos, disorder, fear, as represented by the snake, and in the other hand he holds power and order, sovereignty, as represented by the torque, which would have been worn by the ruling class of Celtic society. But there's another element to this, and we often see snakes in a negative context in respect of our own cultural interpretations brought down by Christianity and their view of the serpent. It doesn't seem clear to me at all that that would have been the case in Celtic society. And indeed, in Roman society, it does not seem to be the case. Snakes, instead, are representative of healing, of rejuvenation, and of life. So far from being evil, they were signs of vitality. Because when a snake grows, it sheds its skin. But before it sheds its skin, it looks like it's dying. I've seen many times in my youth, I used to go catching snakes all the time. And when they're about to shed, their eyes are glazed over. They look old, decrepit, and then they shed their skin and they're brand new again. And so this is a symbol of rejuvenation, of almost like rebirth. It is kind of like a Western version of the phoenix. The phoenix is a later importation from India, but it conveys a similar idea. So snakes were not considered, in my opinion, were probably not considered to be symbols of chaos and evil, but of rebirth. And in a sense, you can even see this in Norse mythology. Now, a simplistic interpretation of Jormungandr, of Ragnarok, is, that the world is destroyed. Well, the world is destroyed, but it's also reborn after Ragnarok. And the snake is responsible for that destruction, but also for the rebirth. So it's not as simple as saying that the snake is representative of chaos and therefore is bad, but it is a symbol of, potentially, of chaos, but which brings about something new, something ultimately which is good. In a Greek context, Asclepius is associated with the snake, and he is a healing deity. And his famous temple at Epidaurus was said to have contained snakes. And in order for someone to be healed, they would actually go into this temple filled with snakes, and they would sleep in a certain spot. And at night, it was said that the snakes would slither up to the people and whisper in their ears, and through that way heal the person, or convey to the person a way in which they could be healed. And of course, even in modern day, the symbol for doctors is entwined snakes. Now, the Greek and the Celtic intersect with the cult of Glycon, who was a snake god worshipped in the late Roman Empire. And Lucian tells a very kind of humorous story about the rise of Glycon and how basically he was just a sham put on by some con men, but which spread throughout the empire and, was very prevalent. And he specifically states that Glycon was very popular amongst the Celts. Now, which group of Celts he's talking about, it's not entirely certain, but there is archaeological evidence for the Glycon cult as far as Gaul. But it seems like in this specific case he's talking about the Celts that were settled in Anatolia. So whether he was sort of saying that Celts were more likely to believe in Glycon because they're gullible fools, or whether there's a deeper cultural significance there to the importance of the snake, obviously we can't know for certain, but it does seem like there may have been this underlying element, which might have been why certain Celtic groups would have been more inclined to worship a snake god than perhaps other people. Now, even in a Christian Celtic context, there seems to be debate about the role of the snake. When you look at what Pelagius had to say about the snake and the snake's role in the Garden of Eden, he actually looked upon that as being a necessary thing, that the snake was in fact playing an important role in the development of humankind, because the snake is what directed people to partake in the wisdom of good and evil. And so the snake actually directs them to gain the knowledge that is required to live as a human being. So the snake is associated with healing and also with wisdom, with knowledge, and possibly magic as well. So when you hear about St. Patrick driving the snakes from Ireland, you have to look into the deeper symbology of that statement. What does it actually mean that he drove the snakes out of Ireland? To me, this symbolizes the old ways, and possibly a direct reference to Druids, driving the Druids from Ireland. And what do we find in Scotland? We find very prominently the symbol of a snake with a Z through it. Now, this Pictish esoteric symbology is almost certainly of Druidic origin. and fades out as the Druidic beliefs die out there after the coming of Christianity to Scotland. And likely this represents either a Druidic order or beliefs or a specific deity, and all of these symbols have some kind of sacred knowledge contained within them. Unfortunately, it is a veil that is nearly impossible to pierce because of the time that separates us and the loss of the knowledge that was possessed, the understanding of these things. But given the general concept of the snake that we have, I think that it's safe to assume that it was representative of perhaps the Druids, because it was the Druids that would have had the knowledge of the healing arts, as well as the esoteric knowledge that is associated with the serpent. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like, subscribe, and as always, stand tall.